Are you applying to college and wondering if you want to get into a top 50 college? Should you apply early decision or restrictive early action if possible? In this video, what I'm going to do is go through the data on early admissions percentiles so that you can figure out where is there a major advantage for applying early versus not that much advantage to help you make a decision where, if anywhere, will you apply early. My name is Brooke. I've been coaching students through the college admissions process for around 20 years. I went to Stanford undergrad. I also teach SAT and ACT prep. I've helped prep students to perfect scores on both of those exams. If you are looking for a live Zoom class, if you are looking for a seminar to pop your score, we also might be doing some boot camps this winter. Check us out at SupertutorTV.com. We've also got an online platform for the digital SAT with original content. We have 4 original tests, so if you're looking to level up and you're burned through your blue books, that's one resource that you can turn to. We also have practice questions. You can even import your blue book tests to see exactly what you missed and target those areas using our lessons that correspond to those blue book questions you missed. So definitely check that out. So what we've done is we compiled the data from these colleges in terms of their ED or restrictive early action percentile of admission. Then we've also found the regular decision admission rate. What percent of students who applied during the regular time or who were admitted during the regular time got in? And then we're going to calculate what we call the ED-RD advantage, which is essentially by what factor are students more likely to get in if they apply early. Now, I will also admit that there are some confounding factors here that we can't necessarily exactly get down to. For example, some colleges on this list are extremely competitive, and most students know they shouldn't really spend their restrictive early action or early decision on that school unless they think they have a shot of getting in, right? So there's some sort of factors we can't completely figure out per se. The other thing that I'll say is at some schools, they might have fewer students who are highly qualified apply early because those students think they can get into really great other universities, but they kind of catch the fall off. A school, for example, like Case Western may get a lot of students who thought they might be able to get into Stanford with their stats, but they might not have had the activities or the story to get them in. But they're really strong engineering students and they might end up at Case Western, but Case Western isn't prioritizing clearly early decision highly, and so they might fall off. But even though it's 0.89 is the ratio, that actually the admission rate is higher in regular than it is early, it doesn't mean that if you apply early, you're ruining your chances. You might get rolled into the regular pool, and that's fine. And they might just wait to decide on you. It also may be that Case Western's early pool is less competitive than its regular pool. And that's what accounts for that discrepancy. It's not that it's actually easier or harder to get in, but again, there's these factors that we can't completely unpack. And so knowing that and taking that with a grain of salt, this is one piece of data you can use, but know that it's a little messy. So here is my high advantage list. Again, these are schools where I think there is a very clear relationship between early decision and a higher admit rate. And 2 statistics I'm looking at to make this list. The first one is the ratio, again, of our ED percent to RD percent. How many X times do you have a probability of getting in just with raw numbers? And then the second factor that I'm looking at is what percent of enrolled students came from ED rounds. And so I'm looking for numbers that are around half of the class or more. Sometimes they're a little bit lower than that, just kind of depending on the profile of the school. But some of the schools on this, maybe they only have, like Notre Dame here has a 1.45 ratio of admission regular versus early, but they fill 82% of their class almost with early decision applicants. So I don't know what that says to you, but that tells me if 82% of the kids that are going to Notre Dame applied early, your best bet is to apply early if you want to go, right? Despite that it's only a 1.45 advantage percentile wise, and I don't know how those numbers work out. But again, it really feels like restricted EA is the way to go if you want to go to Notre Dame. They're filling 80% of their class with EA. It's probably important. So this list, starting at the top, NYU. Now NYU, we don't have the data on for this year, but I am putting it on this list because in my experience as a consultant, I have always found that ED at NYU is a smoother ride and you can get in with lower stats than you can regular round. Okay, so ED at NYU, Dartmouth, Northeastern, Barnard, Tulane. Tulane, it's really important. If you're not going to ED, you at least need to EA or your chances are like nil. Columbia, Colby, Middlebury, Northwestern, Grinnell, University of Miami, Vanderbilt, University of Pennsylvania, Brown, Williams, Davidson, Haverford, Amherst, Tufts, Emory, Wash U St. Louis, Claremont, McKenna, Colgate, and Notre Dame. So again, this is my best return on investment for your ED if you're applying to any of these ED or restrictive early action, depending on which plan they offer. All schools are going to offer one or the other that are on this list. Okay, some advantage. So next up are colleges where I see some advantage to applying early. Generally, these colleges have between about a 2x to 3x advantage, somewhere in that range, approximately. You know, I'm rounding up for some, I'm rounding down for others. Also, around 40 to 60% of their class is filled by students who are on an early admission plan. Harvard, Hamilton, Yale, Duke, Cornell, Boston, Bowdoin, Swarthmore, Wesleyan, Wellesley, Rice, Washington and Lee, Pomona, Villanova, Lehigh, and Boston College. Again, there's lots of factors. We can't totally parse everything out, but you see here there's admission rates that are clearly double or more of what we're used to seeing. So there's got to be some advantage at the majority of these schools. You are getting a leg up, right? At Boston College, for example, 15.26% versus 28.14%. And just think about who applies to Boston College early is not the kids who are applying to Harvard early, right? So when you think about that, and 53.36% of the class is filled early, if you want to go to BC and you're like, man, this is a reach school for me, early is going to be a good plan. Okay, now possible advantage. So my next list is schools where I believe that there is a possible advantage to applying early. And again, this is the point at the list where we start to get into confounding factors. All these schools have a probability that increases by up to double. It might be close to double, but I want you to be looking at, the statistics here. If their ED of the percent enrolled is probably over about 40%, you're probably looking at the ED might have a little bit of weight, right? And there's also 2 schools on this list that we really don't know about. And so my advice in this range is to ask admissions. You can talk to admissions counselors. You can say, hey, is there an advantage if I apply early? You can just straight up ask them. Sometimes they're going to give you a straight answer. But sometimes the other thing that happens with early admissions is that colleges run out of space in particular programs, right? Even schools that aren't on my list right now, for example, Purdue, which doesn't have an early decision program, it's good to apply early because programs like nursing and computer science fill up and then they don't have space and they literally can't admit you because they already admitted too many students and they don't have a lot of space left, right? So that's another consideration, especially if you're applying to state schools or schools that aren't even on my list here because they don't offer early decision or restrictive early action, right? I haven't listed out those schools here. But again, you might want to ask questions on these schools to try to figure it out, but just a ballpark range where it could help you. There could be a possible advantage. Talk to admissions, see what their talk is. So the 2 schools on here with no data are Stanford and Caltech. Caltech has a new restrictive early action program. It's brand new, so we don't really have data on it. And Stanford, I think, is trying to de-emphasize the single choice early action because their pool for single choice early action is really strong. I've actually had 2 students that I've worked with get into Stanford in the last 2 years, and both of them applied single choice early action and ended up getting in March. So they're not counted in the statistics, if that makes sense, but they still applied single choice early action, telling Stanford, hey, you're my first choice. And they got in, but they didn't get in that first round. Stanford waited to tell them until March, right? So I've also seen that happen. I've also had students get in regular to Stanford, without doing any early action. I've had a couple in the last several years. So I'm also of the opinion that from my personal experience, I can see how people get into Stanford applying early, people get into Stanford not checking that early box. And it's a tough admin, and that's just how it is. And the pool is extremely strong early there, stronger than a lot of the other colleges on this list, because Stanford and Harvard tend to be the schools that yield the best, meaning if you get in, the majority of students who get in go. So those 2 are at the top of the list. Carleton College, American University, Brandeis, Smith, Santa Clara, Syracuse, Loyola Marymount, University of Virginia, George Washington University, University of Rochester, Rochester Institute of Technology. And again, these might seem negligible. University of Rochester, it only looks like 1.1, but about 40% of the class gets filled early, right? So that might be a question that I would ask, again, these admissions officers and say, hey, do some programs fill up early? Do you think it would help me if I applied early? Just straight up ask them. I know the percentiles don't totally tell the story here, but again, those confounding effects, preferences, idea of things filling up, these are the kind of things that could come into play with these colleges. You might want to do a little bit more research and see how that goes. Finally, my last list is potentially little, if any, advantage coming with restrictive early action or early decision. So these are schools where there appears to potentially be an increase in admission rate up to about 1.41%, but they're not necessarily filling more than, say, about a third of their class with early decision or early action candidates. Texas Christian, William and Mary, Elon University, SMU, Fordham, Carnegie Mellon, University of Denver, Howard, Case Western, Baylor. I have talked specifically 2 Carnegie Mellon reps, and they looked me in the eye and said, we don't care if you apply early or not. Our admission standards are the same. Statistically, it looks like it's 1.2, so there's about a 20% increase in value here versus the situation. But only about a third of their class, 36%, came from ED. Is there an advantage? Maybe a tiny one. There is one advantage, which is that you find out early. So if these are actually your first choice schools, if you know your dream school is on this list, there's still, even if there's not a huge advantage, there still might be a reason to apply early. And that's because you really want to go there and you know 100% you would go there if you got in. And if that's the case, de-stress yourself, apply early, don't worry about it. But if that's not the case, at this level, you may not need to apply early, And again, you can reach out to these colleges. You could reach out to William & Mary if you're not sure if early decision would be. It looks like there's a 1.39. William & Mary, there might be some advantage. I'm not sure. Reach out to the admissions office. Ask them, do you think there's an advantage, right? Do majors fill up, right? You can ask these kind of questions, and that will help you make your decision. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. And if you need support in this process, we would love to help. Check us out at SupertutorTV.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much, guys. Take care.